Hello, good evening. What happens when truth is buried beneath rubble, when international law is shattered in broad daylight, and when entire hospitals become battlegrounds? As the Israeli war on Gaza plunges deeper into catastrophe, eyewitnesses are coming forward with stories that defy belief and demand accountability. This episode, we go beyond the politics, beyond the spin, and into the heart of a crisis where the human cost is being measured in lives lost, limbs severed, and futures erased. This is not abstract. This is about war crimes in real time. This is about what the world chooses to ignore. I'm Mark Summers, and this is In Focus. Now, on May 28, 2025, the United Nations Security Council convened for a high-stakes session on the worsening crisis in Gaza. One of the most arresting testimonies came not from a state official, but from a physician who had worked in the heart of Qnews. His words pierced the chamber. "I did not treat a single combatant, only 6-year-olds with shrapnel in their hearts, and women whose pelvises had been obliterated with fetuses still inside." He spoke of collapsed hospitals, bombed ambulances, and the deliberate destruction of Gaza's healthcare system. He called for a ceasefire, an end to the weaponization of aid, and for the international community to uphold the UN Charter. Let's watch that powerful testimony now.
Children are supposed to be protected. In Gaza, these protections are simply gone. Every day, the distinction between combatant and civilian is erased. Most of my patients were pre-teen children, their bodies shattered by explosives and torn by flying metal. Many died. Those who lived often awoke to find their entire families gone. Last year, I published in the New York Times a survey of 65 American healthcare workers who had served in Gaza. 83% of them reported seeing children shot in the head or the chest. I personally treated 13 such cases in my 2 weeks at European Hospital. According to the War Child Alliance, nearly half of Gaza's children are suicidal. They ask, why didn't I die with my sister, my mother, my father? Not out of extremism, but out of unbearable grief. I wonder if any member of this council has ever met a 5-year-old child who no longer wants to live. Family, health, and community have been shattered. The medical system has not failed. It has been systematically dismantled through a sustained military campaign that has willfully violated international humanitarian law. Civilians are now dying not just from the constant airstrikes, but from acute malnutrition, sepsis, exposure, and despair. Between my 2 visits to Gaza, I witnessed a sharp decline in patients' health, driven not just by injury, but by worsening hunger and malnutrition that left their bodies weaker, their wounds slower to heal, and their survival far less certain. And let's not forget, this is a man-made catastrophe. It is entirely preventable. Participating in it or not, allowing it to happen is a choice. This is a deliberate denial of conditions necessary for life: food, shelter, water, and medicine. Preventing genocide means refusing to normalize these atrocities. It means refusing to dehumanize the Palestinians, to refuse to see them as calories counted or numbers of trucks moved. We see now that this way of thinking has brought about a human dignity crisis, with an entire people on the edge of survival. I am here because I have witnessed what is happening in Gaza with my own eyes, especially to children, and I cannot pretend not to have seen it.
And the man giving that testimony joins us now here on Qnews, Dr. Feroz Sidwar. He is a board-certified trauma and critical care surgeon from California, and over the past 2 years has made multiple humanitarian missions into Gaza, working under impossible conditions at the European Hospital and Nasser Medical Complex. He recently delivered a powerful testimony, as we saw at the United Nations Security Council, exposing the collapse of Gaza's healthcare system and the scale of atrocities unfolding inside the besieged enclave. Dr. Sidwar, thank you very much for being here with us on Qnews. Let me begin by asking, what compelled you to return to Gaza for the second time, knowing how dangerous it had become?
The main thing was just standing in solidarity with my Palestinian healthcare colleagues there. Obviously, the need for a trauma surgeon is very high there, but yeah, my hopefully my presence there protects them a little bit, and they just need help. So that was it.
And you testified at the UN that you never saw a single combatant in the hospital, yet the narrative persists that Hamas uses hospitals as shields. What is your response to that?
Yeah, there aren't many actual documented cases of this happening. In fact, none from what I can see. There is, it gets into a technical discussion about the laws of war, but there's human shielding refers to moving people into a place where they will be, where an enemy would have to attack them in order to attack a military target, or moving a military target towards people so that the same thing would have to happen. They're called active and passive human shielding. But what Hamas is often guilty of, and this is certainly true, is failing to take what's called all feasible precautions to separate military and civilian assets. The difficulty about that is that Gaza is just such a crowded place that it's extremely difficult to do so. There's no evidence that Hamas has ever deliberately used a hospital as a weapons facility, as a staging facility, has ever fired at Israeli troops from a hospital. Even just like the most damning example that has ever been discovered vis-a-vis Hamas is the discovery at European Hospital just a few days ago, that there is a tunnel that seems to go underneath the emergency room, but it doesn't connect to the hospital in any way. They're not using the hospital. It's just that the tunnel happens to go underneath the hospital. Did they that the tunnel goes underneath the hospital? Was the hospital built before or after the tunnel was built? Like, no, nobody did. These are all questions that a war crimes investigator would have to actually look into. And it's Israel that blocks war crimes investigators from into Gaza. So we'll never know, unfortunately. But in general, there is nothing in Gaza going on that could possibly justify the destruction of the entire healthcare system there, which is what's been done.
And there will be people, supporters of Israel and what they're doing in Gaza, who would perhaps cast aspersions on your claims or doctors' claims. Have you had difficulties with people not believing you or thinking that you're deliberately deceiving people about what's happening in Gaza?
Interestingly, not to my face. Whenever even Danny Danon, who's the Israeli ambassador to the UN and is quite the personality. He makes up all sorts of nonsense all the time. Even he, when somebody asked him about my testimony, he wasn't willing to call me a liar. I was surprised by that, actually. I thought he would. But he didn't deny anything that I said. He just said, well, there's suffering in Gaza, but of course it's Hamas's fault. You can keep saying this ad nauseum because Hamas has been painted as some sort of, it's like, Godzilla and Hamas have the same like motivations in life. They just want to destroy things, but that's just not the case. And once when people realize that Hamas is, it's quite brutal. There's no doubt about that. It's not some nice group of people. But once people realize that it's just a nationalist movement that's been pushed to pretty extreme measures by a pretty extreme situation, that's that they're going to do what they're going to do. But no, I actually haven't had many people claim that I'm lying about not seeing Hamas in the hospitals. Yeah, maybe some random guy on Twitter, but nobody serious.
Now, in your latest mission, you could have died in a hospital strike. Could you tell us what happened that day and talk us through it?
Yeah, it's true that I could have died. I just don't want the focus to be on me specifically. But on March 18th, that was the day that the really widespread bombing of Gaza resumed. And there was an enormous mass casualty event. I think it might have been the biggest mass casualty event that's ever happened in world history, and I mean that literally. But the but we so like I said, I was at Nasser Medical Complex then. So the last operation I did that day, it was the ninth or 10th one, was in a 16-year-old boy named Ibrahim. He had injuries to his colon and his rectum from shrapnel that had pierced those structures. So I took him to the operating room, fixed him up, and by March 23rd, he was actually ready to go home. And he had a colostomy, meaning his intestines came out to his skin, and so he was a 16-year-old kid. So By the evening, he was ready to go home, and we said, "Well, we'll just discharge him the next day, and I'll after iftar, which is the Muslims during Ramadan, they eat a meal in the evening, so it's called iftar when the sun sets. So the or as the sun is setting, I guess. But the so after iftar, I went down to his room just to talk to him, talk to his family about what was going on. He's going to go home the next day. How do you care for this colostomy? Things like that. And I just to make a long story short, as I was walking down the stairs to go to his room, it exploded. The Israelis fired probably a drone fired missile, but who knows? At the room to kill the other guy who was in the room, whose name was Ismail Barhoum. The Israelis claimed that he was the prime minister of Hamas. They also claimed that he had been in the hospital for weeks planning terrorist attacks, which is totally ridiculous. He had not been. I'd never seen him before. And he was just admitted to the hospital a few hours before he was killed. But yeah, so yeah, I was almost in that room, but Ibrahim was killed actually. So after the hospital went into lockdown for about an hour, just because the administration doesn't know, like, are the Israelis are they gonna invade the hospital? Are they gonna bomb it again? Who knows? So after the lockdown was lifted, I went down to the emergency room to see if there were any casualties, and while I was down there, this group of guys ran down the stairs with a body wrapped up in a sheet, and when I directed them to go to the trauma bay, and when I pulled the drape off, I could see it was Ibrahim. His abdomen had been eviscerated. He was dead. I'm sure he had died instantly in the blast. He had probably been dead for an hour at that point. But so yeah, that's but yeah, you're right. I was almost there. But the more important thing is that one of my patients was killed. A 16-year-old kid who really had no reason to die other than just being distantly related to the wrong person. Yeah.
And it seems that there's very little looking into these cases. If Israel says we killed this person and it was because they were this, that, and the other, it seems to be accepted on face value without any particular investigation into it by much of the international community. That must be very frustrating to you.
It is, but it goes back to this decades-long dehumanization of the Palestinians, where again, I don't want, Hamas is such a toxic word in Western discourse that it's kind of interesting. Actually, just since I went to Gaza, I've been looking into it more. I always knew that the presentation of Hamas in the Western media, again, just a bunch of people who like blowing themselves up, like murdering Jews for no obvious reason. It's very silly. It never made any sense unless you assume these people weren't human. Like that, that's literally the only way the presentation of this can make any sense. Not just in the U.S., but really internationally, like you said. But since I started looking into it, there are actually at least 6 books written about Hamas in the English language. I've read all of them, and all of them have at least one Jewish author, usually an Israeli Jewish author. The first one, I forget the name of it now. It's Hamas. It's called The Palestinian Hamas. That was the first one. It came out in 1999 or 2000. Is written by 2 Jewish authors, both of whom are academics at Tel Aviv University. None of these books conclude that Hamas is just some crazed lunatic death cult that wants to slaughter everybody. That's just silly. They all conclude that it's a religiously motivated nationalist organization that, yes, uses quite extreme violence to achieve its ends, but its ends are completely rational, and that's pretty straightforward. It's also kind of interesting, after Hamas won the 2006 Palestinian National Council elections, if I'm remembering the year right, Jimmy Carter had monitored that election. Jimmy Carter was a former American president. He had monitored that election along with Mary Robinson and other people at the Carter Center. And he went to Gaza. He met with, and the West Bank, he met with Hamas leaders. And when he came back from that trip, he wrote an article on CNN.com that was literally entitled "Give Hamas a Chance," meaning give them a chance to govern, give them a chance to be involved in peace talks. And he said straightforwardly, look, I talked to all these people. I met with all of them. There is no reason to think that they can't be negotiated with, that they're just, again, a bunch of fanatical lunatics who will only be happy when they're murdering people. That's just not the case. So yeah, that presentation is frustrating. And again, I just want to be clear: it's not like Hamas is a bunch of nice people. They're not Gandhi or something. That's quite a different matter. But they are a product of the situation that the Palestinians have been pushed to. And if you keep pushing the Palestinians to more and more and more extreme violence, if you lock them in a cage in Gaza, which is what was done for the past 20 years, literally, they've been locked in a concentration camp, not allowed to go in or out, not allowed to do anything, periodically slaughtered from the air. Yeah, I mean, the most violent people in the society will probably rise to the top and will probably start doing really violent things like October 7th. That's not unexpected.
Now, going back to working at the hospital, you've described Gaza's hospitals as displaced persons camps. Uh, could you tell us a little bit about the scale of the human suffering that you encountered whilst there?
Yeah, so this was the Gaza's hospitals were DP camps a year ago. Now, thankfully, they're not. But there's a reason for that, which isn't very pretty. So a year ago, when I was at European Hospital, the hospital was housing about 10,000 people on its grounds and 1,500 people literally living in the corridors of the hospital, the hallways of the hospital. And um, this made it impossible for the hospital to function at all. It was so overcrowded. Everything was filthy. I was sick from literally like 3 days after I got there. Everybody on my team was ill, with diarrhea, with a productive cough, just feeling absolutely miserable because of the living conditions. It was just incredibly crowded. There were people draining out canned vegetables in the ICU sink. The OR staff lived in the operating room at night, like that's where they slept. The ICU staff lived in the ICU. That's where they slept. It was just completely crazy, you know. Now, since then, every hospital in Gaza has been forcibly evacuated. At some point, the Israelis have said either leave the hospital or die. And when people have been when the healthcare staff has been allowed to come back into the hospital afterwards, the Ministry of Health and the local health hospital administrations have decided that they're not going to allow people to camp in the hospital itself because it just makes it impossible. It's not because they have anywhere to go; they don't. And these people need shelter desperately. But if they shelter in the hospital can't function like a hospital. And now that Nasser Medical Complex is basically the only hospital in the Gaza Strip, from what I can tell, in any meaningful sense, um, it's just an utter disaster. If it's not like it can provide enough health care for everybody there, especially in these circumstances, but at least it's provided something. Some access to a doctor always provides some hope for people. So.
And Dr. Sidway, you've also spoken about how aid is being weaponized. Could you explain to us how in practice that works and what that means on the ground?
Yeah, so humanitarian aid is supposed to adhere to certain principles, just like being a humanitarian physician is, for example. Those principles are neutrality. The main one is neutrality. In other words, sticking to doctoring for a second, if an Israeli soldier were to be shot or blown up or whatever by a Palestinian militant group and somehow ended up in front of me at the hospital, I am obligated to treat him, and I would. That's a necessary part of the job. Your services are provided without distinction of nationalist origin, of political affiliation. That's not what matters. You're there to provide healthcare to people who need healthcare, and that's the end of it. And the same is true of humanitarian aid. Now, there's a reason that it doesn't make sense, given that humanitarian aid is meant to be provided without concern for nationalist origin, for political affiliation. There's a reason that you don't set up humanitarian distribution sites in the middle of a military zone. That's completely ridiculous. And we can see exactly the consequences that have happened. I don't know if people have watched this, but since what's called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, it's this completely nonsensical front group created by Israel and the United States. Since it started operating, which I believe was just a day or two after my UN testimony, so maybe about 2 weeks, almost every single day, there has been an Israeli massacre at one of these sites. 20, 30, 40, 50 people shot dead, hundreds of people injured by shootings. And the reason is because they're forcing a huge number of people to go down to the south near Rafah. They completely closed Israeli military zone. The Israeli military insists on only interacting with the Palestinians by shooting them. And I mean this seriously. They refuse to use a loudspeaker. They refuse to just talk to somebody if they get too close to them. They just shoot. And that obviously leads to major problems. Like people are walking huge distances, uh, you know, 10, 5, 10 miles, in order to go and pick up humanitarian aid, which is going to weigh like 50 to 70 pounds, that they then have to walk back. These people are all desperately hungry, desperately malnourished, and they're getting this aid for their families. You have to remember, like most of these people going to these distribution sites, just from the videos you can see, are mostly men, which means that they're going to pick up these aid packages in order to take them back to their families. So they're desperate to you. Everybody in Gaza has 3, 4, 5, 6 kids. If you're that close to aid, you're not going to go back empty-handed to your children who haven't eaten for 3 days. So of course, this is creating a huge number of problems. You can imagine why stampedes are happening. You can imagine why people are invading warehouses, and then you can imagine why things are getting out of control, and Israeli soldiers are feeling frightened by a bunch of unarmed people and then shooting them dead.
Yes,
So
walking in a
huge
threatening manner, I
disaster.
believe, is the new crime. Walking
Yeah, exactly.
in a threatening
And
manner.
exactly. And that's the thing, is that when there are no international journalists allowed in Gaza, this kind of thing is completely opaque. And it's unfortunate, but the Western media just simply will not say that, look, if the context that's always provided in any Western article or an interview on television or whatever is that the war started after Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, which is technically true, I guess. But the context is never Israel makes these claims, however, bars all foreign journalists from entering Gaza. Therefore, we see no reason to take them seriously. Like there's no it's just kind of ridiculous. If the Israelis aren't going to let journalists into Gaza, it's perfectly obvious why that is. Like if Iran invaded Iraq and barred all foreign journalists from entering there, we would know exactly why they're doing that. It's not complicated. If Iran said it was for their safety, which the Israelis claim, we would laugh hysterically.
Yeah.
Especially if Iran had killed more journalists in the last 19 months than in all of that all I think it's all, if I remember the numbers right, Israel has killed more journalists in Gaza than all who were killed in World War I, World War II, the U.S. invasion of Iraq, the Balkan wars of the 1990s, and the war on terror, including the second attack on Iraq combined.
Yeah.
If I'm remembering the numbers from the Brown study of war paper, these numbers are insane. So so the Israeli claim that you should just believe us because of course we're telling the truth, except for we've killed all the journalists who could have told you the answer, and we don't allow any more to come in is hard to believe for any rational person.
And of course, if they were killing Western journalists, we might hear more about it. But because they're not killing Western journalists, they're killing often the local journalists, then that seems to be somehow acceptable. The word that is bandied around a lot and gets a lot of traction, many people think it's absolutely true and it's hard to see otherwise, is genocide. A genocide going on. From what you saw on the ground, would you describe it as such?
I people ask me this all the time, and I don't mean to be coy by not giving an answer, but what I say is I don't think anyone should care what I think about whether, for me, I would be a witness in a genocide trial, not a judge, because I don't know anything about these things. Like I could tell somebody what I saw, and then they have to determine if it's genocidal. Well, so let's just ask, what do the people who study genocide for a living say? They all say it's genocidal. And furthermore, you're talking largely about Israeli and American Jews. I just woke up, so I apologize. There, the names are Omer Bartov, Amos, I forget his last name now, but anyway, there's dozens and dozens and dozens. And furthermore, just to be clear, they've been saying that a lot of them have been saying this since October of 2023, saying, look, just listen to what the Israelis are saying out loud. On a week or two after the October 7th attacks, there was a group of several hundred international jurists and genocide scholars who signed an open letter saying that Israel is going to commit genocide in Gaza. The International Court of Justice, the way the Genocide Convention is worded and works is extremely bizarre. It's like legalese taken to 1,000. But But the way it's hard to interpret the International Court of Justice's findings in any way other than meaning that they believe that Israel probably is committing genocide in Gaza, or excuse me, that Israel is possibly committing genocide in Gaza, and they need to. It's worth investigating further. So yeah, I mean, if all the genocides, if the large majority of genocide scholars in the world, including Israeli Jews, say clearly and plainly that Gaza is being subjected to genocide, I don't see any reason to doubt them. It doesn't matter what I saw on the ground or not. And just to be, just to emphasize that point about me being a witness more so than a judge, Omar Bartov is probably the world's leading living Holocaust scholar. The greatest Holocaust scholar was Raoul Hilberg, but he's passed away. Bartov wrote an article in the New York Review of Books, maybe 2 months ago, 3 months ago, and when I was reading it, I actually was surprised to see my name come up. And he referenced the New York Times piece that I had written where I had polled 65 American healthcare workers about children being shot in the head or the chest in Gaza. And now he cited it. He didn't make any qualification. He didn't say, well, but this might not be true. He didn't say, oh, look, I'm not Muslim, but he didn't say, oh, look, it's a lot of Muslims that answered the poll. These people are all anti-Israel fanatics. He didn't say any of that. He just cited it and moved on because it's obvious that there's no reason for 65 American healthcare workers who don't know and don't even know each other to coordinate some massive lie. Like, it's just completely ridiculous,
Well,
so I
well,
think we should listen to the genocide scholars on that question, and they seem to be pretty clear about it.
Well, I'm sorry for interrupting you, but we are out of time. But I really appreciate you coming and joining us today, and thank you for getting up early for us. I know it's very early over in the United States. But Dr. Firuz Sidhwa, thank you very much for your courage and testimony and for the work that you do. Thank you very much for being here with us. Now, what you heard tonight cannot be unheard. This isn't just a humanitarian crisis. It is a collapse of moral order. Hospitals should not be battlefields. Children are not collateral. And silence at this point is complicity. We leave you with this question. If witnesses and witnessing suffering doesn't move the world to act, then really what will? This has been In Focus. We will not look away. Thanks for watching.